have spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action. One of the most important concepts in leftism is imperialism. Imperialism. This is the little red book, Mao Zedong. It's a little bit wet. I got some unnamed water beverage on it. This is the little red book from Mao Zedong. And it talks about imperialism. And when people like us talk about imperialism, we are not referring to a policy. We're not referring to one country conquers another country. We're talking about a global economic system. Lenin wrote his very important book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. And in that book, he talked about how capitalism, the economic system in which the banks, factories, and industries and centers of economic power are operated for the profits of a small group of owners, it had entered its stage of monopoly, in which a few big corporations, trusts, cartels, and syndicates dominate the economies of Western countries. Britain, France, Germany, the United States, the Western countries are dominated by a few ultra-monopolistic corporations. Banks, houses of finance sit at the center of the global system of imperialism. And Lenin lays all of this out there in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. We are living in the era of monopoly capitalism, imperialism. And the understanding of that is that around the world, imperialism is holding back economic development. It's keeping the people of the world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. It is preventing countries from developing their own industries, keeping them in states of chronic poverty and dependency so that huge multinational corporations can reap in super profits. It is a global economic order. And when a country breaks out of imperialism, when you have a country like Cuba or Venezuela or Iran or Russia or China, when a country breaks out of imperialism, they become the target of imperialist attack. Wars are waged to enforce this economic system of imperialism. Troops are sent in to crush independent governments that might emerge. Sanctions are imposed on countries as economic warfare. The USA loved Russia when it was deeply impoverished, but when Russia broke free with the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, started raising itself up out of poverty, the imperialists couldn't stand Russia. We had the Cold War. The imperialists loved China when China was poor, but when China broke free with the Chinese Revolution led by Mao Zedong, at that point they hated China and they wanted to crush China. They'd sent troops to put down the Boxer Rebellion in 1901, to crush an attempt by China to break free under the leadership of the Boxers. And when China broke free once again under the Chinese Communist Party, the USA attacked them. It threatened them by attacking on the Korean Peninsula, waging a war on their border in Korea. The USA fomented the Tibet Civil War, killing almost 500,000 people, waging a proxy war against China in Tibet in the 1950s. The USA has done everything it can to crush Russia and China because they're competitors. Because now Russia has raised itself out of poverty. It's lifted its people up. It's, industrialized. It's wiped out illiteracy, invented space travel. China is now the second largest economy in the world. They hate Russia and China because they broke free from imperialism. They developed, they raised themselves up. And now all over the world, people are buying their natural gas, not from ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, or Chevron, but from Gazprom and Rosneft. Russia is competing with the Wall Street imperialists on the global energy markets. They're not a captive market having to buy their oil and gas from the United States. Instead, they are competitors with the Wall Street oil and gas monopolies. And China, instead of being dependent and having to import cell phones from the United States, they've built Huawei technologies the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. And they're competing with Apple and Samsung and Western companies and Verizon in telecommunications. They don't have to import their steel from the United States or from German steel companies. Instead, China makes half the steel in the world, and people around the world are buying their steel from China. The imperialists don't want any competitors. They want the world to remain poor so that they can sit at the top as monopolies. They want to hold back development. They want to keep the people of the world impoverished so that they can maintain their monopolies. And the wars of the 20th century, the Cold War, was largely an attempt to beat back the countries around the world that were beginning to raise themselves up out of poverty with socialist methods. And the new Cold War, the new emerging confrontation with Russia and China, is the same thing. It is the imperialists trying to maintain control of the world. And this is the basic Marxist message. This is what Lenin lays out in his book, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. This is what the Bolsheviks fought for in 1917, peace, land, and bread, breaking their country free. This is what Che Guevara wrote about when he said imperialism is doomed, and he called for 2, 3, many Vietnams around the world. And in the Little Red Book, this is what Mao talks about. And I'll read you what Mao wrote in the Little Red Book. Mao Zedong wrote, U.S. imperialism has invaded China's territory of Taiwan and has occupied it for the past 9 years. A short while ago, it sent its armed forces to invade and occupy Lebanon. The United States has set up hundreds of military bases in many countries all over the world. China's territory of Taiwan, Lebanon, and all the military bases of the United States on foreign soil are so many nooses around the neck of U.S. imperialism. The nooses have been fashioned by the Americans themselves and by nobody else. And it is they themselves who have put these nooses around their own necks, handing the ends of the ropes to the Chinese people, the people of the Arab countries, and all the people of the world who love peace and oppose aggression. The longer the U.S. aggressors remain in those places, the tighter the nooses around their necks will become. Imperialism will not last long because it always does evil things. It persists in grooming and supporting reactionaries in all countries who are against the people, and it has forcibly seized many colonies and semi-colonies and many military bases, and it threatens peace with atomic war. Thus, forced by imperialism to do so, more than 90% of the people of the world are rising. Yet imperialism is still alive, running amok in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In the West, imperialism is still oppressing people at home. Let me repeat that. In the West, imperialism is still oppressing people at home. This situation must change. It is the task of the people of the world to put an end to the aggression and oppression perpetrated by imperialism, chiefly by U.S. imperialism. This is just basic Marxism, folks. He writes, riding roughshod everywhere, U.S. imperialism has made itself the enemy of the people of the world and has increasingly isolated itself. Those who refuse to be enslaved will never be cowed by the atomic bomb or hydrogen bombs in the hands of the U.S. imperialists. The raging tide of the people of the world against the aggressors is irresistible. Their struggle against U.S. imperialism and its lackeys will assuredly win great victories. If the U.S. monopoly capitalists persist in pushing their policies of aggression and war, the day is bound to come when they will be hanged by the people of the world. The same fate awaits the accomplices of the United States. Over a long period of time, we have developed the concept for struggle against our enemy. Strategically, we should despise all our enemies, but tactically, we should take them very seriously. This also means we must despise the enemy with respect to the whole, but we must take him seriously with respect to each and every concrete question. If we do not despise the enemy with respect to the whole, we shall be committing the error of opportunism. Marx and Engels were only two individuals, yet in those early days, they already declared that capitalism would be overthrown throughout the world. But in dealing with concrete problems and particular enemies, we shall be committing the error of adventurism unless we take them seriously. In war, battles can only be fought one by one. The enemy forces can only be destroyed one by one. Factories can be built only one by one. The peasants can only plow the land plot by plot. The same is true of eating a meal. strategically. We take the eating of a meal lightly, but we know that we can finish it. We actually eat it mouthful by mouthful. It is impossible to swallow an entire banquet in one gulp. This is known as the piecemeal solution. In military parlance, we are wiping out the enemy one force by one. It is the opinion of the international situation has now reached a new turning point. This is Mao. This isn't Alexander Dugan. This is Mao. This is Mao Zedong in the Little Red Book. It is my opinion that the international situation has now reached a new turning point. There are two winds in the world, the east wind and the west wind. There is a Chinese saying, either the east wind prevails over the west wind, or the west wind prevails over the east wind. I believe it is characteristic of the situation today that the east wind is prevailing over the west wind. That is to say that the forces of socialism have become overwhelmingly superior to the forces of imperialism. That's Mao Zedong. And that is our ideology. That is our ideology. That is what we believe. That the system in which production is organized to serve the people and public good, not the profits of a wealthy few, is going to overcome this system that took root in the East, this system through which the Russians and the Chinese, and then the Cubans and the Venezuelans and the Iranians, this system that enabled these peoples and nations to break free and begin raising their people up out of poverty and been constructing and no longer be held in chronic poverty by the imperialists and the Wall Street monopolists. This system is prevailing and will overtake the dying system of imperialism and production organized for profit in the hands of a few Wall Street, London money sharks and profiteers. This is our understanding, that imperialism and all reactionaries are paper tigers, that they are doomed, and that the system of production organized to serve the people, a system where the banks, factories, and industries and the centers of economic power are organized to serve public good, and the people control the means of production, that this system will overtake the imperialist system, that the system that began in the East will spread to the West, and that imperialism, the global monopolistic financial system, is doomed. That's basic Marxism. And let me add, this is what Mao Zedong said on another very important issue. Again, this is the Little Red Book. This is the Little Red Book that I have in my hand here. This is not the Nazbol encyclopedia. This is the Little Red Book. That Mao Zedong says, in the final analysis, national struggle is a matter of class struggle. Among the whites in the United States, it is only the reactionary ruling circles who oppress the black people. They can in no way represent the farmers, the workers, and the revolutionary intellectuals and other enlightened persons who compromise the overwhelming majority of white people. Did you see this? So he's saying that imperialism is oppressing people at home. He's saying that the black people are being oppressed by imperialism, the racism and discrimination, at this time the lynching and the Jim Crow segregation that black people were living under and fighting back against at the time this book was published, that is something that the imperialists created to maintain their system, and that it is in the interests of the white farmers and the white workers and the white revolutionary intellectuals to align with the black people against the oppression that they are enduring in order to overcome the imperialists. That is what Mao Zedong is saying. This is Marxism-Leninism 101. You can read it in the Little Red Book. You can read it in Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism. This is what we believe. And it shouldn't be that hard for people to understand, right? It's pretty clearly laid out. What I just read to you is not complicated economic theory. What I just explained to you is not super complicated rocket science. This is what Marxism-Leninism is all about. This is what 21st century socialism is all about. This understanding of U.S. imperialism being the main enemy of the people of the world and the people of the United States. Mao Zedong said imperialism is oppressing the people at home. Mao Zedong says it's only the capitalists and the imperialists that are oppressing the black people, and that the people of the United States will gain their liberation by standing arm in arm with the people of Africa and Asia and Latin America against the imperialists. This is Marxism-Leninism, that the same big banks and corporations that set up the prison industrial complex are the same big banks and corporations that colonize and exploit people in Africa. that the same big banks and pharmaceutical companies that set up the opioid epidemic and made billions of dollars pushing doctors to overprescribe medications, these same big banks and corporations are dominating the world, preventing countries around the world from developing their own pharmaceutical industries, maintaining a captive market over the control of drugs and medical supplies. That the same big corporations that profit from these wars to tear down independent countries are the same corporations that are pushing the U.S. government to send young men from Ohio and Pennsylvania and Texas to go and get shot in Afghanistan or in Iraq or in Libya or in Syria for the profits of big banks and corporations. That it is in the interests of the American people to struggle against imperialism. That the big corporations, the Wall Street monopolists, are not patriots. They are not loyal to America. They are loyal only to their profits. And they have sold the American people down the river. They have presided over deindustrialization, decreasing the living standards of the American people. And it is in the interest now more than ever before for the American people to join with the struggles of the people in Russia and the people in China and the people in Venezuela and the people in Iran and the people all across the world in the struggle against U.S. imperialism. This is the basis of our ideology. This is what Marxist-Leninists, what socialists, 21st century socialists, scientific socialists, anti-imperialists, patriotic socialists, whatever you want to call us, this is what we believe. That the imperialists are traitors, that we share a common destiny with the people of the world, that the black nation struggling for liberation from the colonization and exploitation has a common destiny with the American working class. The entire American working class should stand with the black freedom struggle, that the entire American working class should stand with the immigrant workers against discrimination against the immigrants, that the entire American working class should stand in solidarity with the countries around the world struggling against U.S. imperialism. This is the basis of what we believe. It is the economic analysis that lays the basis for anti-imperialism, for Marxism-Leninism. Now, our enemies despise this ideology. Our enemies cannot understand this ideology. Our enemies are repulsed by this ideology. And tonight, I am going to show you first a hit piece that was made about me by one of our Republican enemies, by a neoconservative think tank. And then I will show you a hit piece that was made against our community and against what we stand for by a synthetic left think tank. And you will see how their critique of us is exactly the same. The synthetic left and the neocons serve the same agenda and have the exact same critique of our community and what it stands for. And they are fundamentally opposed to what is laid out in the little red book, what is basic Marxist concepts. If you are not opposing imperialism and capitalism in its monopoly stage, you are not a Marxist-Leninist, you are not a revolutionary socialist, you are not a revolutionary, you are not an anti-imperialist. If you are not standing against the global system of monopoly capitalism, you are not trying to build solidarity with those who are resisting it around the world, you're not consistent with Marxism or Leninism or anti-imperialism or scientific socialism. This is basic. This is basic. Some of the synthetic left fall into this illusion that they see it as like a checklist, right? To be a good progressive, you're against racism, check. You're against sexism, check. You're against transphobia, check. You're against homophobia, check. You're against fat phobia, check. You're against smoker phobia, check. You're against anti-drug use phobia, check. You're against discrimination against short people, check. No. And you're against imperialism. No, this isn't how it works. All of the oppression in the world, the racist oppression of black people, the situation that forces people to immigrate to the United States because of the exploitation that they face and the destruction of their countries around the world, the situation facing the immigrant workers, the situation facing women, all of this flows from imperialism. And opposing imperialism is what we are all about. And we stand in solidarity with people who are struggling against imperialism because we realize that the only hope for humanity is tearing down imperialism. It's all about anti-imperialism. Imperialism is not just a line at the end of the checklist. That is not what we're about here. We are about opposing imperialism because imperialism is the main thing holding back human progress. And our hope is that overturning imperialism can lead to the construction of a rational socialist society in which growth can be no longer held back by the irrationality of greed and profits in command, in which human creativity can be unleashed to higher levels than ever before, and in which essentially human beings can create a society with so much abundance and so much prosperity, a society where labor becomes life's prime want, no longer a necessity, a society in which social hierarchies fade away and people can live in peace with each other, from each according to their own ability, to each according to their needs. This is Marxism-Leninism, my friends. There is nothing new about this, nothing unique about this. This is our fundamental belief system. And our enemies do not agree with this. Now, this first clip I'm going to show you, it's a little bit shorter. This is from a hit piece that came out against me that was published in 2017. It was published right after Donald Trump was elected in 2017. I had just started working at RT. My relationship with the Workers' World Party had come to an end. And something called the Capital Research Center, which you can check out their website, capitalresearch.org. This is a neoconservative think tank, and they hired Trevor Loudon, who's an anti-communist nut. He's the guy who started KeyWiki, and they hired him to make this hit piece against me. It's a short 20-minute film that the Capital Research Center, which is a neocon think tank, made. And if you look at the board of the Capital Research Center, they've got guys from the Heritage Foundation. They've got people from the Hoover Institution. They've got the Park Place Group. This is neocons. It's just classic neocons, Heritage Foundation. And this is them trying to understand and explain my politics. And Don D is writing down our super chats, so we're good on that front. This is Trevor Loudon of the Capital Research Institute. This is Trevor Loudon trying to make heads or tails of my politics. And we're going to go through what Trevor Loudon has to say.
Through his positions with Iran's Press TV and Moscow's Russia Today. There's a young man in America called Caleb Maupin, a member of the Workers' World Party. And
it's also, at this point, I was not a member of the Workers' World Party, but, you know, he's got old information. Caleb Maupin is not a member of the Workers' World Party, Trevor. He's not with them anymore. It's 2017, and he stopped being with them in 2015. You might want to catch up on your research, Trevor.
Extreme radical.
U.S. society, born in racism, slavery, and the slaughter of the indigenous people, is now entering a deep political and economic crisis.
Who's been working.
Now, is that true or not? Was the United States founded on slavery? Yes. Was the United States founded on the slaughter of the indigenous people? Yes. Is U.S. society entering an economic crisis? Yes. And in fact, these are things that anybody would say, right? And in fact, I think a lot of the woke people would probably say what I just said, but he thinks that's a scandalous thing to say. He's a neocon.
Working as a correspondent for Press TV, and now Russia Today, RT, going around these anti-Trump rallies, reporting on them, reporting on the division in American society.
Trump, he did win according to the U.S. Constitution, so you're saying you're protesting against the American democratic system, right?
So did Hitler. That doesn't mean we have to accept the way this, as it is. We need to fight back against this fascist system.
What?
That's me. Right after Trump won, when there was rioting in Oakland, I went to Oakland to interview the protesters. And I'm interviewing a woman there from the Revolutionary Communist Party. And I'm actually challenging her. And I'm saying, did not Trump actually win legally? And she says, so did Hitler. Right. And that represented the view of the woke protesters that were out in the streets, the anarchists of Oakland that were marching. They had these rallies that went all night. So I'm doing my job. And in fact, you can find MSNBC reporters, you can find Fox News reporters asking this very same question. But he's interpreting that as me supporting the anti-Trump protesters.
Why do you think he'd be doing that?
Well, look at what he's doing and what he's working for. He's coming from a hardcore Marxist-Leninist fringe group that supports the North Korean regime, working as a paid agent for the Iranian government's propaganda machine, and then moving over as a paid agent to Vladimir Putin's propaganda machine.
Well, I've never been a paid agent of anybody. I'm a journalist and I do journalistic work, right? That's, would you call a New York Times reporter in Iran There's a New York Times reporter who's based in Tehran. Would you call him a paid agent of the American propaganda regime? No, you'd call him a journalist doing his job. So I'm not a paid agent of anybody. I'm a journalist doing my job. But let's not quibble over the important stuff.
So when you're looking at this from a case of ideology, it doesn't make sense. How can a communist be working for Shiite Islamic fundamentalists and then for the gangster regime in Moscow? But if you think of it from what is the underlying agenda, which is the common purpose is to destroy America, it makes perfect sense.
Actually, if you read the Little Red Book and you know anything about anti-imperialism, it makes a huge, huge amount of sense what I'm doing. I'm standing in solidarity with the people of the world against U.S. imperialism. And I'm standing against the global economic system that is destroying the lives of people all over the world. And I see countries that have broken out of that system as allies in the global struggle against imperialism, the system that, mind you, is destroying America. I don't want to destroy America. Caleb Maupin doesn't want to destroy America. Caleb Maupin, Mr. Trevor Loudon, is actually trying to defend the American people against the Wall Street banks and corporations that are also trying to destroy Russia and China. I'll speak this way so you can understand it, Mr. Trevor. You see, big banks and corporations that are always trying to get us into a war so that they can make profits are also destroying America. And I'm from Ohio, and I don't like that. I don't like that there's people in my hometown who have gone to Iraq and Afghanistan and gotten shot, you see. You understand it, Trevor? I'm actually standing up for the working people against the imperialists. Anyhow, they don't understand this. How can he's not a Shiite Muslim, and he's a hardcore Marxist-Leninist and a Shiite Muslim. How can he be supporting Putin? How can he be supporting Iran? This doesn't make any sense. It actually makes perfect sense if you know anything about Marxism-Leninism. Let's continue.
This is the person that I know personally. Again, not that I'm a friend, but I encountered him on a number of occasions.
You know who this man is? He's a Republican. He's not actually Russian. He goes to these things and tries to video people and makes these edited videos to make it look like all communists are stupid. So that's what he does.
We're
so
just listening to his ideas.
Know who he is. Yeah.
Yeah. Former Soviet citizen Vladimir Joffe, that's his name. I think his YouTube channel is still up. He called himself former Soviet citizen, and he would go to like left-wing socialist protests in New York City. And he would go to them, and he would show up, and he'd point a camera in people's face, and they would say, "Tell me why socialism is good." And they would say, like, socialism is about fighting for working people. And he'd say, "Really?" And his best line is, "Really?" And he would just walk around protests. He would just walk around protests, kind of, harassing anti-war protesters, and then saying, I grew up in the USSR, and in Soviet Russia, everyone was killed every single day. They made us eat little babies for breakfast. No, I was there. I lived under it. I mean, he's just kind of a buffoon who was like stalking leftist circles and like videoing people. And so, yeah, many times he would try to get up to me, and I wouldn't talk to him because I'd seen his YouTube channel and I knew that. But so here he is stalking me. I think this had to have been like 2014, maybe even 2013. I was in Union Square on May Day, and he's stalking me. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you. So that should tell you volume about the ideology and the direction of Russia today, which is very much
really
capitalist, anti-American, but actually there's a better word, subversive. That's what they're trying to do, subvert our system. That's their goal.
Subvert our system. That's what they're trying to do, to subvert our system, our great system, right? They're trying to sow unrest and make us question our leaders and subvert our system. And we've got to oppose those Ruskies and those Iranians and people like Caleb who are trying to subvert our system. So that's the neocon critique of me. That's brought to you by the Heritage Foundation. That is brought to you by the great Trevor Loudon, who's talking about Caleb Maupin. That is one critique of my work, and they can't make heads or tails of what I'm doing. It just doesn't make any sense because, why, how could he possibly want to stand in solidarity with Russia or stand in solidarity with China or stand in solidarity with Iran? How could he possibly want to do that? Because everybody knows that these regimes their ideologies are different. And if you know anything about Marxism, and imperialism. It makes perfect sense what I'm doing. But let's go to, this is something. Now, this next thing I'm going to show, now this is very interesting. This comes from The Right Podcast, it's called. Now, this is a new YouTube channel that's been set up. It's called The Right Podcast, and it's connected to something called the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right, CAR. And you can check out their website, radicalrightanalysis.com. And if you click on About Us, our partners, you'll learn who they're all about. So just like the neocon critique of me, I was paid for by the Heritage Foundation. I was paid for by the Hoover Institute. Now, this critique of me from the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right is brought to you by opendemocracy.net. Soros, George Soros. It's also brought to you by who else? We got the Small Steps. We got Tech Against Terrorism. We got Moonshot, Social Enterprise Working to Disrupt and Ultimately End Extremism, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, a bunch of NGOs and nonprofits, and George Soros. They and some of their partners have this new podcast called the Right Podcast, and it's supposed to be analysis of what they call the far right. And so they have a whole video about quote unquote Nazbols, and just like Trevor Loudon and the people at the Hoover Institute and all of that think I'm a menace because I'm the far left and are trying to convince you I'm secretly the director of anti-police brutality protests and protests against Donald Trump. Well, now the folks at the Right Podcast, they think that I am the sinister ideological director of the so-called Nazbol movement. I'm secretly working for Donald Trump. And this is their critique. And I'm going to show you a lot more of this one because it's amusing, and I want to show you guys what these people are like, because there's not a bone. It's not that these people lie; they do lie, but there's a lot of ignorance and willful ignorance of what we believe here. And I want to use this as an opportunity to talk about what it is that we at the Center for Political Innovation believe, because it's worth talking about. So here we go.
Call them maybe alt-imperialists. Then Caleb is definitely a bridge from Dugan to Twitter. And
I'm a bridge from Dugan to Twitter. No, I'm not. I have met Dugan, Alexander Dugan, one time in my entire life. When I tweet, Dugan does not tell me what to tweet. I don't know how in the world I am a bridge from Dugan to Twitter. A guy I met one time at a conference in 2018 in Russia is somehow responsible for what I tweet. That has got to be the stupidest thing I've ever heard, but it gets better. Trust me, this is just the beginning.
Social media and YouTube broadly to the Western audience. This video, it's become something of a meme itself. Just positioning Caleb next to Dugan and saying like he's a fascist, but that type of overgeneralization can lead to equivalency or just dismissal or name calling, and people go on their merry way.
Yeah, namely because Alexander Dugan, in his book The Fourth Political Theory, vehemently rejects fascism. And in fact, I actually have his book, which is banned from Amazon, right here in front of me. This is what Alexander Dugan says about fascism. I'm reading to you. You don't believe me? This is page 45 of Alexander Dugan's book. This is what he says. This is what Alexander Dugan thinks about racism. He says, the newest types of racism are glamour, fashion, and the latest trends in information technology. Its norms are set by models, designers, and socialites of political parties. Conformity or nonconformity with the glamour code is located at the very base of mass strategies for social segregation, cultural apartheid. Undoubtedly racist is the idea of unipolar globalization. It is based on the idea that the history and values of Western, especially American society, are equivalent to universal laws, and artificially tries to construct a global society on what we are all actually locally and historically values. Globalization is nothing more than a globally deployed model of Western European, or rather Anglo-Saxon ethnocentrism, which is the purest manifestation of racist ideology. As one of the essential, and then he goes on to say, clearly highlighting the main trajectory and rejection of all forms and varieties of racism, including the biological theories inherent in Nazism, we can identify the fourth political theory and borrow from it. Strongly rejecting any suggestion of racism, we in fact destroy the hermeneutic circle of the National Socialist ideology and neutralize its content, undermining its integrity and the key foundations. Without racism, National Socialism is no longer National Socialism, either theoretically or practically, and it becomes harmless and decontaminated. We can now proceed without the fear to analyze it objectively and to be integrated as the fourth political theory. He goes on to say, he's basically going on to say that basically fascism, if you read what he's saying here, right? Hitler's racism is only one form of racism. And this type of racism is most obvious, straightforward, biological, and therefore the most repulsive. But there are other forms of racism. In addition to Hitler's anti-Semitism and the doctrine that Slavs are subhuman and must be colonized, it's led Germany to go to war with the Soviet Union, which cost millions of lives. It is true that this resulted in the Germans themselves losing their political freedom and their right to participate in political history for a long time, if not forever. Today, they are left only with their economy and its best scenario, concern for ecology. The supporters of the third way are left in the position of ideological outcasts on the margins of society. It was racism, in theory and practice, that criminalized all other aspects of National Socialism and fascism, causing these world views to become the object of historical curses and vilifications. He's denouncing fascism backwards and forwards in here. Racism is what caused the collapse of Nazism in the historical geopolitical sense. This is not only a historical, but also a philosophical collapse. Racism is based on the belief that the innate objective superiority of one human race over another. It was racism that brought such consequences, leading to the immeasurable suffering on both sides, as well as the collapse of Germany and the Axis powers, not to mention the destruction of the entire ideological project of the Third Way. The criminal practice of wiping out entire ethnic groups, Jews, Gypsies, and Slavs, based on race, precisely rooted in their racial theory. This is what angers and shocks us about Nazism to this day. So basically, he's going on and talking about how fascism is wrong because it led to the Holocaust, and how unipolarity and the idea that the Western way of being, what he calls unipolarity, the idea that the ideology of the West, of the United States, that he argues that Nazism and its theories of racial superiority, and in addition to that, unipolarity, the idea that the Western way is the best way, the world should be centered around America, that these are the same thing, so that his reason for opposing the United States and his reasons for opposing Nazism are the same, because they both believe in the innate superiority of the European people, right? So the idea that Dugan is a neo-Nazi is pretty ridiculous. Those sentences there, calling out Nazism for its disgusting racism and its crimes against humanity, and saying that it has been basically thrown into the dustbin of history because of its horrendous crimes. Dugan is not a Nazi. Dugan is many things, and I am not a Duganist, and I disagree with Dugan on many, many things, but you cannot honestly read The Fourth Political Theory by Alexander Dugan and believe that because I talked to him, I'm a Nazi, because Alexander Dugan makes it very, 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 very clear in this book that he ain't a Nazi. He is clearly not a Nazi. In fact, his fourth political theory is a theory that he has developed, which he argues is an alternative to both communism and fascism. He argues that the first political theory is called liberalism, and that liberalism is the main ideology in the world, which he opposes. He says the second political theory is communism, fascism is the third political theory, and that his ideology is what he calls the fourth political theory. I do not agree with the fourth political theory. I agree with the second political theory, Mao Zedong. But to equate me with Nazis because I sat next to a guy who is vehemently anti-Nazi is stupid. And this guy, whoever this dumb academic that the Right podcast has on there, he's at least smart enough to know that if you do that, a lot of people are going to listen to my content, and they're going to see my years of anti-racist work, and they're going to see, my support for the struggle against police brutality, and they're going to see my highlighting of Black revolutionary intellectuals around the world. They're going to see my support for immigrant workers in the struggle against the discrimination that they face. They're going to see all these things, and they're going to go, yeah, you're full of shit. And that's most of these attacks on me are purely full of shit. Now, this guy is trying to be smarter, right? You know, he's probably getting paid to do this podcast. I mean, you know, Soros and all of them have money. But anyway, he's a little bit smarter than most of my critics. So he goes on, he says, don't just call Caleb a Nazi because he sat next to Dugan, because technically that's not correct. Well, no shit, Sherlock. It's definitely not correct. But let's continue.
And for some, that's monetized, and you want to keep that wheel churning. But it's
so it's monetized, and you want to keep that wheel churning. Calling me a fascist, even though it's not true, is monetized, and you want to keep that wheel churning. Meaning he's okay with people making money and getting likes and being on social media. People like Vosh, people like Thought Slime, making smearing hit pieces, trying to equate me with people I vehemently disagree with, and trying to convince you I'm a Nazi. And you want to keep that wheel turning, and they're making money from it. So we just got to let them do it. So we'll, you know, that shows you how sinister these people are. And it also shows you that Thought Slime and Vosh, and these people aren't thinking of this stuff on their own. You know, this right podcast, it's these kind of professor kind of guys, people like Ben Burgess, people like this guy. They're the ones who are sitting there and coming up with the smear tactics strategy and feeding it to the idiot bread tubers. This is very interesting.
Actually, an interesting listen. And Dugan introduces the concept of right-wing populism here, which builds upon, I think, his fourth political theory, saying that it's kind of giving it a new name, but it's like what we saw with the primary source, a very vague thing too. And it's a interesting transition, because that's where, you know, Caleb kind of picks up on this populism, and he uses it to bridge what Dugan is saying, and some of these things that you would say, well, what does this have to do with the left in the United States, looking at his primary source work?
Oh dear, what does populism have to do with the left? I don't know. Yeah, you know, that Eugene Debs going around fighting for working people and fighting for a working class movement to seize the banks and factories and build a better life to the people. You know, what does populism have to do with William Z. Foster building those unemployment councils and trying to organize people of different races to fight, stand together and demand jobs and housing during the Great Depression? Well, my goodness, what does populism have to do with, you know, the union struggles in this country and the sit-down strike wave, where the unions occupied their factories, and black workers and white workers, men and women workers came together and occupied their factories? What does populism have to do with the left? Oh goodness, my goodness. You want to talk about historical simplism. It's not until after the Second World War, with the dawn of the synthetic left and the booming US economy, that there was any notion that the left was anti-populist or not. So, I mean, the idea that he thinks populism is somehow inherently right-wing, he's just completely politically ignorant, and that somehow I'm connecting the left with populism. Look at the history of the word populism. Read about the People's Party, the populist party of the 1800s. Read about the great populist leaders that existed and fought against the big monopolies. This guy has no idea what he's talking about. But somehow, you know, Caleb is doing this weird thing where, like, somehow he links the left with populism. There's nothing more populist than socialism. Socialism is the idea that instead of an elite group of people controlling the economy, that we, the people, should seize control of the banks, factories, and industries, and that we should have an economy organized to serve public good, not the profits of a wealthy few. The people should control society, and the economy should be organized to serve the people, not a wealthy elite. If that's not populism, I don't know what populism is.
But bridging it, looking at individuals in American populist history, tying populism to the labor movement, tying the labor movement to early.
Tying populism to the labor movement? The labor movement was populism. The workers against the bosses. Like, how do you tie populism to the labor movement? It is, the labor movement is inherently populist.
Iterations of communist groups in American history, and building his case from there. Now, for the summary of this video, I suppose, just remember again that Caleb works for RT Media, so it's not necessarily extraordinary that he has access to someone like Alexander.
Bum, bum, bum. Just like Chris Hedges, just like Larry King, just like, Oh boy, who else? Just like, wow, a lot of names that come to mind. Ed Schultz, you know, that's true. I do work for RT. And the idea that everyone who works at RT gets access to Dugan is a little bit of a delusion, I can tell you. And again, I've met Dugan once in my life, once in my entire life. I've met Alexander Dugan. I believe Dugan's done like one interview on RT. It was on their interview show. So yeah, this is pretty ridiculous. And you know, Dugan's just one thinker in Russia. A lot of Russians don't agree with Dugan. A lot of pro-Putin Russians don't agree with Dugan. Like this is ridiculous.
Dugan. But in this video, he launches into an extremely biased Russian take on the Maidan protests in Ukraine. And he states that it was in that time that he became alienated from other leftists in the US. He talks about how...
Yeah, because other leftists were supporting U.S. imperialism in its attempt to overthrow and successful attempt to topple the Ukrainian government and put a pro-Nazi regime into power. And all these people are also concerned about the right wing and the right wing and the far right. I was in the streets marching against the United States toppling the Ukrainian government and bringing in a government that had a bunch of neo-Nazis in it. And I was a little bit alienated from the fact that so many so-called leftists were supporting that move to topple the Ukrainian government because Russia bad. I think my position is pretty defensible because, again, I'm sticking to what's in this book, U.S. imperialism, the main danger to the people of the world.
Significant it is for him to be meeting somebody like Dugan. And you have to realize this was right after Dugan was talking about how globalists want to replace humanity, the agenda reassignments, and how traditional culture and identity are at the forefront of combating modernity.
Yeah, you know, and I've met with Iranians that are standing against U.S. imperialism, that are supporting the Black freedom struggle in the United States, and they also think that homosexuality is wrong. And you know what? I've marched in solidarity with communists in Venezuela and communists in Latin America who feel that homosexuality is bourgeois decadence. And I've stood in solidarity with the Nation of Islam and Minister Louis Farrakhan. And, you know, I've marched on the picket lines against the death penalty with Roman Catholic priests and nuns who believe that abortion is a sin and should be outlawed, who believe that homosexuality is a sin and that gay marriage should be gotten rid of. I am against the imperialists. I stand against the imperialists. That's what I do. So somehow I'm responsible for Dugan saying stuff against trans people, even though that's not why I was meeting with him. I was meeting with Dugan because he's an important anti-imperialist thinker in Russia. That's why I was meeting with him. But somehow that, you know, him saying something transphobic, allegedly, I don't even know if he really said it because these people lie. Somehow I'm responsible for that. You know, am I responsible for everything that every Catholic priest and nun that I've marched with against the death penalty says? Am I responsible for everything that that every Muslim I met with in Iran or every Muslim I've marched with in support of Palestine says? I mean, do you think the big crowds of people in New York City that march for Palestine, do you think all of those Muslims, especially the more observant ones, do you think all of them support gay marriage? Do you think they all support abortion? Do you think that they're all out there for trans rights? This is ridiculous, ridiculous. So yes, Dugan may have said some stuff against trans people in the past. Somehow I'm responsible for that because I met him one time.
Caleb claims that, you know, his backstory, he became fascinated with left ideology by getting excited about, in quotes, you know, revolutionary armies marching in uniform.
Yep.
And he talks about how...
Yep. When I was a kid in Ohio and I saw how evil what the U.S. imperialists were doing, invading Iraq, lying about weapons of mass destruction, murdering people, and I saw how people were being oppressed. Yes, when I heard about Cuba and how the people of Cuba have resisted and stood strong and built revolutionary armies to stand strong, when I read about the people of Korea on the Korean Peninsula and how they resisted and stood strong and, yes, wore uniforms, when I read about the Black Panthers who, yes, marched and wore uniforms, I was inspired. Yes, guilty as charged when I read about the people of the world resisting the U.S. imperialists and wearing uniforms and building not crazy, you know, sloppy synthetic left, you know, Chaz dance parties in the streets, but instead building organized, disciplined revolutionary movements. I am inspired. You bet your bottom dollar I am when I hear about people standing strong against U.S. imperialism and making sure that what George W. Bush did to Iraq, destroying their country, ripping it to shreds, killing hundreds of thousands of people, making sure that doesn't happen, forming a solid block of resistance to the imperialists, coming together, belonging, not being alienated, not being isolated, but feeling like they are part of a community and struggle. When I read about how Chinese children, are handed a red scarf on their first day of school, and they tie a red scarf around their neck, and they're told that that little red scarf is their piece of the Chinese flag, and it stands for the blood of all the people who sacrificed to get them where they are today, and that they have a responsibility to build a new China for all the people. When I read about that, I am inspired. Yes, sir. I am far more inspired by that than by the Chaz and by, a bunch of people banging on drums and using drugs. You betcha. I'm inspired by that. Guilty as charged. When I read about people who love their country, love their homeland, love their community, and come together to resist the destructive forces of Wall Street and the destructive forces of London imperialism that are trying to grind countries into poverty, and they do so in a disciplined, organized, effective way, I like it. Guilty as charged. Guilty as charged.
Western leftists he met alienated him. He described their shabby clothes and essentially describes his generation, the millennial, what he calls the millennial generation, as being kind of infantile, childish. But I think that they...
No, I have not. That is a complete distortion of my words. What I describe is how capitalism has robbed the millennials and Zoomers of the dignity of adulthood. If you can't go out on your own and get a decent job, if the wages and the economic situation is so bad that you can't support yourself, that you can't live on your own, that you're stuck living in your parents' household, that is a crime. And there is a generation of young people that have been basically castigated by economic circumstances to a very miserable life of being an almost permanent teenager. And it's awful. And when they talk about why don't millennials get married, why don't millennials buy houses and cars, they're talking about an economic situation that is created by student debt, that is created by deindustrialization, that is created by the driving down of wages and the economic crisis, and it sucks. And there are millions of young people across the United States of America who are stuck in this horrendous situation by capitalism. And it is a crime. And I'm not blaming them for it. I'm blaming Wall Street for it. I'm blaming the billionaire bankers and monopolists that instead of giving young people a decent job, want to give them opioids. Instead of giving young people a decent job, they want to give them psych meds. Instead of giving young people economic opportunity, they want to give them pornography. They want to give them LSD. They want to give them hallucinogens. They want to give them marijuana, but they don't want to give them the opportunity to live with dignity as an adult. The younger generation of the United States has been screwed, and they are angry, and they are getting ready to fight. They are getting ready to fight. And no, I'm not blaming them. I'm not saying, oh, you lazy kids, get your shit together. That is not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying the opposite, because I was in that situation, folks. I sold my blood plasma to survive. Look, when I was living in Cleveland, there were times I spent days without food, right? I was in that situation. Now, luckily, I moved to New York. I worked at one place. I worked at another place. I worked at an insurance firm for a while. I worked with Ramsey Clark, and I've been able to figure out how to, use my skills to become an anti-imperialist journalist and reporter. But my heart goes out to the millions and millions of young Americans that have had their future robbed from them by capitalism and imperialism. So no, I do not blame them. I do not blame them. I'm not a right-winger saying, oh, every kid gets a trophy now. That's not what I'm doing at all. So that is just a complete and utter lie and distortion of my words. I am the biggest defender of the youth of America against the crimes that the imperialists have committed against them. That's what I am. He is completely misrepresenting my words. Completely misrepresenting my words.
The key word would be degenerate. And this directly echoes Dugan's assessment.
I never use the word degenerate. And I don't use it for a reason, because I don't think it has any meaning. It's not a word that has any meaning. It hints at anti-gay stuff, and I'm pro-LGBT. It hints maybe at some anti-trans stuff. I don't have a problem with people being trans. So I make a point of not using the word degenerate. I might, when I'm quoting and referring and explaining what Trotskyites believe, I might explain that they believe the Soviet Union was a, quote, degenerate workers' state. That's the only time you're going to find me using that word. I don't use the word degenerate. Haas might use it. Go talk to Haas about that. People on the right wing might use it. Go talk to them about it. I don't use the word degenerate. I don't do that. So he's just lying when he says that I use the word degenerate. Show me one place. Find me one place where I use the word degenerate. Show me one place where I use it. This is just a lie.
Of the left from the fourth political theory. You see this time and time again, and we'll get into more of Caleb's broader ideas. But in this, those are the things that stuck out to me. Also, really talking up a meeting that he had in Iran, and I was going to get into that, but again, for the sake of this video, there are some excellent articles about red-brown alliances that discuss that particular meeting. But just for this section here, with
the second New Horizon conference that I went to was attended by Gareth Porter, the left-wing journalist. It was attended by Medea Benjamin, the head of Code Pink. The third New Horizon conference, which I attended, was completely devoted to the Black liberation struggle. It was attended by the leaders of the Nation of Islam. It was attended by Vernelia R. Randall, the editor of racism.org. She's based in Ohio. She's an academic with Antioch College. Yeah, it's such a reactionary conference, right? Medea Benjamin and Vernelia R. Randall and Black Lives Matter activists. Yeah, so reactionary. They have no idea what they're talking about.
This transitioning away from Alexander Dugan, this Russian intellectual with political sway, to Caleb, who is an American and has a history in American left movements.
Yeah. Let's go over my history. My history is very interesting. In fact, I'm not going to go over it right now, but if you go to my website, calebmaupin.com, you can read about my long history as a progressive, anti-racist left-wing activist. So yeah, the idea that I'm some kind of Nazi because I sat down with a guy who makes it abundantly clear in his book that he ain't a Nazi is pretty ridiculous. But thank you, Mr. Academic. Please continue.
For this particular video, just the notion of how much he really does agree with Dugan, even though he says that they disagree on many things, and just the idea of where he's coming from, that he got interested in leftist politics because of the uniformity of the revolutionary armies that he saw, and their marching and their uniforms and that kind of military pomp.
That's the only reason I got interested, is I just saw people marching, and I was just like, whoa, military marching. Yeah, seriously. That's the only reason I got interested. This is such a straw man, and it's such a ridiculous straw man. Yeah, I heard that there were military uniforms of people marching, and I heard that they came from communist countries, and that's how I got interested in communism. Talk about a lying straw man. This guy is just such a despicable liar.
Well as the way in which he describes leftists, modern day leftists in the US, using words, a term degenerate is very
I don't use the term degenerate. I never use that word.
Important because it's a reactionary term. It's going to be
and I don't use it
that we see he uses in a conspiracy.
No, I don't use it. No, I don't use it. Show me one place I've used that word, you lying sack of shit.
The CIA.
I don't use the word. I don't use the word.
It's also a nice way to create that kind of curve into a circle of including these people are drug users.
And again, is it a fact that MK Ultra has been promoting drug use into left-wing spaces? Are drugs good? Tell me, after the Chinese Revolution, what did they do to all the opium dealers, all the people that were selling opium? What did they do? Did they give them a medal for helping people explore and expand their minds with opium? What did Mao do to all the drug opium dealers in China? What did Fidel do to all the people who were caught importing drugs into Cuba? Yeah, opposing drugs. What did the Black Panthers do to heroin dealers? Have you ever read about this? The Black Panthers went around assassinating heroin dealers. Did you know that? Yeah. I think being opposed to drug use makes me pretty much in line with almost all of the leftists in the world. And let me add that I am in favor of legalizing drugs. I don't think anyone should go to jail for smoking marijuana. I don't think anyone should go to jail for using drugs. I think it's a dangerous medical problem when people have an issue with addiction and they need treatment and they need sympathy and counseling and support. I don't believe in harsh punishment for drug users. But that said, the idea that being against drugs somehow means that I'm on the right this guy knows nothing about the history of communism. Drugs are a tool to oppress the people. That has been the Marxist-Leninist understanding from day one. And I have seen in my own personal life, I have seen what drugs do to people. I have so many classmates who went to high school with me, who've dealt with the opioid issue. There's I think 4 or 5 people who graduated from high school with me who died from opioids. It has destroyed the hometown that I grew up in. So he thinks that me opposing drug use means I'm a Nazi. What an idiot.
These people are trans people and LGBTQ, and these people don't want to make anything.
When did I say that? It's really funny that there's so many prominent trans people in the Center for Political Innovation. The very organization I've started has many prominent trans people in it. So, maybe you ought to ask some of the trans people that are leading the CPI why they think that I'm saying this. These are words I don't use the word degenerate. I didn't say that.
Don't have any ideas. They just want to tear things down.
That mainstream left, yeah, they don't have any ideas and they do want to tear things down. And all they do is sit on the internet and tear people down and harass them and cancel them and try to destroy people's lives and careers. That is what they do. And they go around and they tear down Confederate statues and they don't replace them with any good statues. And they say that there is no truth and there's nothing to believe in. Yeah, that part is true.
Very reactionary, Tucker Carlson, right-wing style talking points. We'll see that.
This is how simple their minds are. They have no idea about this stuff. In their minds, you either are a liberal, a stupid liberal like them, or you're with Tucker Carlson. They can't comprehend that there's this whole ideology that defined the 20th century called Marxism-Leninism that is neither Tucker Carlson nor Maddow. This guy, I hope this guy isn't a professor somewhere, and I think he is. This is some academic, the Right Podcast and the Center for Analysis of the Radical Right hired. And he's so simplistic in his mindset. He thinks that anyone who opposes drug use, anyone who talks about what the millennial generation has endured, anyone like that must be on the right. This is how ridiculous and shallow-minded. This is a lot like Dinesh D'Souza, who thinks the Nazis must have been leftists because they criticized capitalism. It's like the notion of right-wing anti-capitalism has never occurred to Dinesh D'Souza. These people are the mirror opposite of it. Well, Caleb must be right-wing because he's criticizing aspects of Western society and culture. The Nazis were right-wing and criticized capitalism. They were right-wing anti-capitalists. And I am left-wing, but I am criticizing aspects of American capitalist culture because I'm a left-wing anti-capitalist. You see, the world is bigger than blue team versus red team. I hope this guy doesn't teach political science or something. And this is how shallow these people are. They have no understanding that politics in the world is much bigger and more complicated than their stupid MSNBC, CNN, red team versus blue team game. It is infuriating to listen to. It's like he can't understand that what I'm saying and what Tucker Carlson's saying are not the same.
Caleb uses many of them. And here's a mashup, a quick look at some of Caleb's YouTube content. We can see that it focuses on attacking Democrats. There's not any really attacking of Republicans or the right or Donald Trump.
That's false. I have whole videos raking PragerU over the coals. I have a video screaming at Donald Trump, refuting his anti-communist talking points. When Donald Trump had a crowd of people chanting, send her back, against Ilhan Omar. I talked about how ridiculous that is. Just recently, someone's been taking a series of, arguing socialism videos where I specifically go after Ben Shapiro. And, I refute the talking points of Ben Shapiro and Charlie Kirk. This is just a lie. The idea that I don't ever criticize conservatives and Republicans. I just showed you all how conservatives and Republicans made a whole hit piece against me in 2017. This guy is just a lying sack of shit. I mean, that's what he is. I go after PragerU. I went after Trump all the time over his Cuba policy, over his anti-communist remarks at the UN. I mean, this is just a lie. These are just lies. The reason I'm criticizing Democrats right now is because they have the upper hand and they seem to be the dominant ideological force of the ruling system right now. They have the upper hand. Their ideology is coming at me. Donald Trump is banned from social media.
We see BreadTube serves imperialism with Jimmy Dore, and
BreadTube does serve imperialism because they support the neo-Nazis in Ukraine, the Azov battalion, because they support the Uyghur separatists trying to break apart the People's Republic of China, because they go around demonizing Russia. They go around supporting U.S. foreign policy. They say that anyone who criticizes George Soros, one of the main funders of U.S. imperialist ideology around the world, is anti-Semitic. Yes, BreadTube and harassing people like me, BreadTube and demonizing Russia and China and supporting Western imperialism and its struggle to defeat anti-imperialist states. BreadTube serves imperialism. And I wrote a whole book about it. Yeah. How in the world is that not consistent with what's in this book and what the Marxist Leninists have always taught? Yeah. I'm not understanding how that makes me right wing.
You know, when we get into this ecosystem of Jackson Hinkle and Jimmy Dore and Caleb, you know, all these people are borrowing off of each other to create content. And this is also another conspiracy that Caleb has, that, you know, this group of left-leaning people on YouTube is actually compromised by the CIA.
Actually, that's proven now. That's proven. I mean, we have the smoking gun. Abigail Thorne was proven to be getting money from U.S. intelligence linked foundations. And in my book, I don't say it's a guarantee. I just point out that Steve Hassan, the cult expert who called for a mass deprogramming of the country after Donald Trump was out of office. He called for, you know, after January 6th, that he's advising different members of the BreadTube community in their deprogramming work. From what I understand, he's been whispering in the ear of ContraPoints and some others, and that he was advising BreadTube, and that BreadTube was being promoted in mainstream U.S. media. And I said, it seems to me like sections of the U.S. establishment, perhaps the deep state, but most especially sections of the ruling class and the corporate elite, are promoting the BreadTube folks as an alternative to the alt-right and a safe form of socialism that doesn't challenge property relations. I wrote a whole book making that case, and that book has been widely praised by Jimmy Dore, by Jackson Hinkle, by lots of people. Peter Coffin, others read that book and thought it was actually very insightful. And I proved everything that I said. I backed it up, and I was speculating. And now we have the actual proof. We have the proof from Max Blumenthal that, yes, these BreadTube commentators are getting funded. And Abigail Thorne now jokes, oh, yeah, I got funded by Soros. Ha, 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 ha. Well, you know, so now it's a fact, yes, that folks that are tied in with American intelligence, folks that are tied in with the NGO apparatus are funding BreadTube. This is a fact, not a conspiracy theory. I have been fully vindicated and validated.
The borrowing of right-wing talking points, wokeism is a false messiah.
Again, not right-wing talking points from Marxism, Leninism. You know, not everyone who disagrees with the liberal order, you can just put them in a box. They are so desperate to do this. It's like you say something that, you say one thing that goes outside of these people's scripts, they try to take it and then shove you into something completely different. I mean, this guy, he must think like a light switch. Like, oh, there's only two possible positions in the world. No, there are all kinds of ideologies in this world. There are all kinds of worldviews. I'm a genuine, hardline, Marxist-Leninist, anti-imperialist. I'm a 21st century socialist, and I'm a city builder. And just because you can't label me Democrat and label me Republican, this is, again, he's not this stupid. If he's an academic, he can't be this stupid. This is willful ignorance.
These blatantly pro-Russian stances.
Yes, I support Russia, a country that was devastated in the 1990s by neoliberalism, that broke free from that and has aligned itself with Venezuela and with Cuba and with Iran and with China, and as part of the emerging bloc of anti-imperialism. Yes, guilty as charged. I stand with the Russian people against U.S. imperialism. Why is that scandalous? And if you know anything about me, that shouldn't be a surprise.
The current conflict in Ukraine, but just in general with NATO and geopolitics, essentially just, you know, regurgitating what Alexander Dugan had stated previously.
No.
We can see
I'm regurgitating what Mao Zedong said decades and decades before Alexander Dugan. You don't have to be a Duganist. You don't have to have Dugan to oppose American imperialism. This is basic. I mean, I could read it all to you here in the little red book. It's like, I'm sorry, this guy thinks Dugan invented anti-imperialism.